Welcome to the fifth talk in a series, Genesis, the first three chapters. We've already seen in the series so far phrases like in the beginning God, and the early universe was formless, void and empty, and into that God spoke that great divine fiat, let there be light. I want to take a bit of an overview of the first chapter and say that we've already observed development. We've moved from a darkness situation to light. We've moved from sterility to fruitfulness. And effectively, this whole first chapter is moving from the cosmic to the personal. The whole series is based on the whole premise that the Genesis chapters 1 to 3 are foundational for a relational universe. Now, because of this development, there have been numerous attempts to integrate the biblical text with, say, Darwinian evolution. I can think of up to 9 different ideas which have been put forward, written about, in ways which seek to integrate these two worldviews, the biblical text and evolutionary science. Not all of those have been particularly helpful. We could find ourselves guilty of trying to defend the wrong territory when we seek such integration. Now, what we find in Genesis chapter 1 never purports to be a scientific journal. But don't be alarmed. I do believe in the literal truth of the Bible from cover to cover. But not that it's literalistically true. There is a difference between that which is literally true and that which is literalistically true. And I'll come back to that and illustrate it in a moment. It depends what type of literature we're encountering. So, for instance, history is not the same as poetry. Story is not the same as narrative. Prophecy is not the same as song. Each literary style or genre that we encounter, we tackle differently. Now, most texts that we encounter in the Bible are very clear as to what literary type they are, but we occasionally have difficulty with some. So what are we encountering here? Well, I'm going to tell you a story which might help illustrate the difference between the different literary genres. Many years ago, I was with a party doing some work in Israel. And whilst we were there, we took a journey from Jerusalem to Jericho. And on that journey, we stopped at a particular site. Now, we'd been around Jerusalem, we'd been to Bethlehem and other places. And when you get to particular sites which were deemed to have important biblical references, you often got a plaque on the wall saying, whatever it was, the Church of the Immaculate Conception, and on the wall there'd be a plaque saying, please respect the sanctity of this site. Well, on that route from Jerusalem to Jericho, we encountered a broken down old building, and on the side of that building there's a plaque which read, the Inn of the Good Samaritan, please respect the sanctity of this site. Is it the same as all those other sites? No. The Inn of the Good Samaritan didn't exist. It was a story that Jesus made up. And so to treat it in that same sense as narrative and history would be a mistake. It was a story, quite clearly. Now, it may well have been that Jesus told a story about a route which was notoriously hazardous, that it was a typical event that people did get mugged on that journey. But Jesus told a story. It was a literary genre not to be treated as history. Back then to Genesis chapter 1. There are great truths to be quarried from the seams in that chapter. There are wonderful things. It is literally true for the literary genre that it is, whatever that be, and there are great truths in it, and they are the things that we must get to grips with. And what we find here in chapter 1 is we've moved from nothing to something. We've moved from the inanimate to the animate to the sentient to human beings. And at the heart of that chapter, we find that humanity is the pinnacle of God's creation. We've literally moved from the cosmic to the personal, and humanity is the pinnacle of that creation. But that raises questions. Is humankind intrinsically of greater value than other elements of the creation, be it animate or inanimate? And the other question is this: can an evolutionist ever consider that any part of the development of humanity is the pinnacle? Because evolution suggests that we carry on developing. Now, I want to answer those questions in one or two ways. Firstly, to speak of the Judeo-Christian way of getting to grips with different elements of the creation. Unlike our friends in Eastern or Buddhist cultures, they would say that there's a pantheistic view of God. God is part of everything, whether animate or inanimate, human or animal. They don't differentiate in that sense. So you can't speak of something being of greater value than another part of the created order. It also suggests that if one is greater, then do we have license to abuse that privileged status by the abuse of animals or the environment itself? I think the important first step in answering that is to recognise that in the Genesis 1 account, the creation of humanity is always linked with our engagement in responsible stewardship for all that God has set before us. So, pinnacle, let's look at that word. We have reached a unique point in human development where we have the ability to halt that development. In other words, that we can control our environment rather than be controlled by our environment. The second thing to say about pinnacle is that it means we are the apple of God's eye. We're the high point of his interest. Apple of God's eye is a phrase used by David in Psalm 17. It means we are the pinnacle focus of God's attention, but not to the exclusion of the rest of creation. We always have a responsibility to that which God has created. So, as Genesis 1 leads into the rest of Genesis and into the rest of the biblical text, the principal focus of God's interest is humanity, but never to the exclusion of the rest of his creation. Indeed, we have a God-given responsibility to care for God's creation on his behalf. We are stewards. The personal, infinite God has created personal, finite humans in whom he has invested his personal interest, love, and engagement. And that's the story of the Bible. Now, as with other talks, I need to give you something to ponder or discuss. How does being the apple of God's eye imply both great human dignity and great human responsibility at the same time? Well, thank you for watching, and look out for the next video in the series Genesis, the first 3 chapters.